Here we go. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight, I am joined by an award-winning and New York Times best-selling author of many, many books, some of which recently that she wrote just on her own, called The Girls of Atomic City, um, The Last Castle, and her most recent novel, which just came out, I want to say maybe a week or two ago, The Obstinate Daughters, The Rebels, Writers, and Renegade Women Who Ignited the American Revolution. That's right, it's your favorite writer of mine, Denise Kiernan. Denise, how the heck are ya?
Hello, I'm here. I am good. I'm mid running around talking about book things and so got in from St. Louis and Milwaukee today and I'm off to Atlanta on Saturday and then Raleigh and Chicago and Alabama next week and just running around seeing a bunch of great bookstores, which is pretty fun.
Yeah.
How you been?
Yeah. Busy. Just trying to stay busy at least. Trying to stay cool. I don't know. How's the weather down there? As of right now, it is 96 degrees, but it was over 100 earlier.
We didn't hit 100 today, but we were mid to upper 90s. I think it's still like 92 right now, which, in the mountains is not something that usually happens
Yeah.
down here in Asheville, North Carolina.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about it. So you're in Asheville. You guys got hit really bad by the storm. God, was it 2 years ago now, or like when was that?
September 2024, almost 2 years. Yeah.
Because I remember there was like no electricity. I remember Joe sending out like these emails every once in a while of like updates for
Yep.
like everybody, just because no one could get a hold of you, no one could get a hold of your husband Joe.
Nope.
What?
Nope. There was no electricity. We had no water, which was probably the hardest thing. We didn't have water for close to 2 months because it damaged the reservoir. So like open your taps, nothing comes out. So Um, that was pretty intense. But yeah, we'd hike to the overpass. A lot of the cell towers got knocked out. So we'd walk up to the overpass or the police station because that was where you could actually get a brief, and you'd be there with a bunch of other people doing the same thing, where you could get like a brief connection to the internet or to an emergency cell tower they had put up at the police and fire station, but everybody was there trying to use it at the same time. And so we'd put out these, we'd send an email, and then like my friends and his friends and our families were instructed, like if we left anybody off this list, forward it to them because you'd get this moment of connection and like 75, 100 texts would come through going, "Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? What's going on?" And you can't reply to them all. So yeah, it was pretty intense. It was pretty crazy.
And there was looting too, right? Like you guys had
Oh
witnessed
God, yes.
some really rough stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a lot going on. We had damage, but not as bad as some people. I mean, some people lost everything, but we had to do a lot of repairs around here as well. There's still some trees down way down and back because getting them removed is like it's a whole other thing. So
Yeah.
there's still some just sitting back down there. But parts of the town have come back. Well, parts are still, some places are debating whether or not to put their businesses back in these structures that are clearly in a floodplain. And so, you can't get them insured and things of that nature. So it's a process.
So I remember, I mean, Asheville, like when I had visited, God, now we're 2006, so
It was a while ago.
couple of years. I mean, it was at least what, 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Did It was very hoppin'. Is it still? I mean, like has that hoppiness come back, or is it still maybe not as hoppin' as it used to be?
It's coming. It is definitely coming back. Definitely 2025 felt very, very, very slow because, you know, everything getting built back up took a while, and people would see a picture of a town near ours that was still in a shambles and they'd think, "Oh, we can't go to Asheville because that's what it looks like." And so places that were ready to welcome visitors, visitors weren't always getting the message that you could come and that there would be things to do. But yeah, it's really like this summer feels very spring and summer feels very different. Feels a lot more like it pretty much like it used to be, which is very, very vibrant and busy and lots going on. So of course, now nobody wants to be on the streets because it's 96 degrees and no one expects that when they come here. But yeah, so it's definitely coming back for sure.
Yeah. All right, so let's jump back a little bit. I remember in the green room I mentioned that we had done, I think, a podcast back in the old days when I had actually done a podcast. So I know we had probably discussed all this stuff, and I feel like we've known each other for a very long time. Um, so I'm still going to act like this is our first time we're meeting or something like that. So
That's
so
that's
for
the
you,
that's best, I think.
yeah.
Yes.
So for you, I mean, I know you as like a nonfiction writer. So
Yeah.
oftentimes when I talk to writers, it's mostly fiction, and I ask you like, do they remember like the very first creative thing they would have done? I mean, for you, I don't, do you maybe remember the first creative thing you would have done, or like, do you remember the very first thing or inkling that kind of was the
That's it.
seed that like got you to where you are right now?
Sort of. I mean, it's interesting that you think that that wouldn't be a question for a nonfiction writer. I mean, I do write other stuff, but the
Right. No, no. And to be clear, I'm not saying nonfiction you can't be creative or whatever, but I'm just saying, like, if I was sitting down with a journalist, I wouldn't want to say, like, when was the first time you made something up?
Sure.
But I mean, that's still that first thing, that first maybe like a storytelling or like, I don't know, like, at what point?
I
Yeah.
Yeah, I've written in some form basically since I knew how to write. I mean, like I was doing diaries and all that stuff from a very young age. But then as it got like, I mean, even in middle school, I wrote a play and made all my friends act in it and then got permission from our middle school to let us stage it. So we had a play put on. Um, that was a lot of fun.
And what was that play?
This is super original. Brace yourself. It was called Cinderfella, and the main character was a guy instead of a girl, and a 12-year-old guy instead of a girl. How hilarious is that? I know you've never heard that before.
Well,
Um,
okay, but to be fair
it was
though,
great.
I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of stuff nowadays they do a lot of more gender swap of like, storytelling or whatever else. Like that
We
wasn't
felt
really
very we
that
felt
wasn't
very avant-garde.
yeah, I mean back how long ago was this? I don't think that was something that was probably, I mean that was probably very considered very original. Did you still have that play?
Oh my God, I don't. That's a good question. I save a lot of stuff. I don't think so. I have pictures of the day we put it on at school, though. I have pictures of the day we put it on at school. That was fun.
And
Yeah.
then did you write any other plays? I mean, was that initial like a direction you wanted to go in?
I have written several screenplays and a radio play, and I do have a manager that I work with for those things. But I also kind of on a parallel track, though I didn't study writing. I was biology pre-med. Um, but I got started in journalism. Like that was because I found it really interesting. I loved interviewing people and I loved hearing other people's stories. And that kind of segued into, well, I was still doing the other stuff on the side, different kinds of writing, but journalism was a way for me to make money as a writer, which I knew could be challenging. And at the time, you could make money as a journalist. Now, I should, let everybody know that, I will be at the end of this month, I'll be 58 years old. So, when I was doing all this, 30, about around age 25 is when I really started digging hard into journalism and actually starting to freelance and things like that. So that was a God, I can't believe it's that long ago, but it was. And so you could actually have a very decent career as a freelance journalist at the time. But then I wanted to do longer form projects. And that's kind of what led to, met somebody who had an agent. The agent said, well, the amount of time you spend trying to pitch, a big 2,500, 3,000 word magazine article, you could write a book proposal. And so then things kind of started to, it's always been sort of a mishmash of doing a little bit of all the different kinds of writing until there's a major project to finish up, and then everything, including housework and all the rest, kind of goes out the window.
So prior to that, had you had any um, intention, any desire to write a book?
Prior to
To where you said
the journalism.
the journalism, and they talked about how well you might as well just work on a proposal.
Yeah, a book proposal. Yeah. No, I had just sort of thought I would just keep pitching stories to glossies, or, I would occasionally and I had some screenplays in circulation at the time.
Well,
Um,
and let's talk a little bit about those. So, like
yeah.
at that, like what type of screenplays were those?
Thrillers mostly. I love thrillers. So one thriller that I'm actually thinking of reviving, because some of the material that was in that story, and that one got the most kind of, I like to say it had all the best coffee cup stains on it. So it made some good rounds and got some good feedback from some, I was very hopeful about that one. My manager was too. But the subject matter, I feel like almost is more kind of relevant now, possibly. Um, so yeah, I like thrillers. I wrote a romantic comedy, but I would say of the three that are popping into my head right now, two of the three were thrillers. Yeah.
Had you ever thought about dabbling in fiction, like adapting those
Yeah. Oh,
into a
yeah, yeah.
novel?
I've definitely thought about like, well, I have these entire scripts. I've got the outline, I've got the dialogue, I've got the characters. So yeah, I may very well do that. And see, what's interesting, and this is kind of what's interesting about writing as a career, what you can do with it is constantly shifting. Like now, the possibility of, fleshing something out and getting it designed properly and getting it edited and just selling it yourself is much different than it was when I was first starting out. If you were going to self-publish when I first started out writing, you had a garage full of books that you would mail to people, and that was the only option. So, yeah, I do actually think about that. I do actually think about that. I think that though I've, obviously spent, pretty much my entire career in traditional, big five publishing. I think what a lot of self-published authors are doing is so incredibly smart, and I think they're being more agile and more adaptive to a changing marketplace. And I think the options are constantly expanding. And if you just love to write and you love to get your words into the hands of readers, however you get it there, I think is, however you get it there. So it's kind of interesting that I feel like there are constantly more and more opportunities. And storytelling in general, I came across, I didn't read this. I actually thought about sending it to you. There was um, it was something mobile first. Their studios are doing like mobile first films now, or they're talking about doing mobile first films. So like the first format is not going to be theater, it's not going to be streaming, it's literally going to be designed for mobile phones.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
that's
I
what
know.
Quibi was supposed to be, and that died really quick.
See, I don't even know what that is. It must have died really quick. So
Yeah, Quibi was this thing, and they had a lot of money, and they ended up, paying writers, producers, directors, actors a lot of money to basically make these little, like, I think it was supposed to be like 5 to 10 minute like episodes. And so oftentimes I think now you'll find these movies that are have been pieced together from having been, yeah, honestly, they were they were around such a short amount of time that I can't even really tell you any more about them. But yeah, Quibi was a thing where it was meant to be, just content you basically watch on your phone.
Yeah, maybe they were ahead of their, I mean, maybe they saw where things were going. I don't know. But
But
anyway, so I don't
yeah.
know if it's gonna, I don't know how that's gonna play
Well,
out. And I need to dig into that story because I was very curious because there were a lot of like, high level actors and producers and folks who were signing on to it. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. Um, all that to say, there are distribution for stories is constantly evolving. It's a very dynamic field, and I think it's important to kind of pay attention to, what's going on.
yeah. So prior to the starting to dabble in screenplays, had you written like short stories or poems or anything?
A couple poems for myself, mostly journaling. Mostly journaling. Yeah.
Yeah. So with the
Journaling and the occasional
screenplays,
play. Hmm?
like what was your inspiration at that point to start playing around with screenplays? Or like had you been reading any screenplays? I mean, nowadays you can easily go online and find, the script for whatever. I mean, back then finding scripts was probably a lot harder, but
Well, there was actually there's a great book that it was about the movie Swingers. You know the movie Swingers?
yeah, Favreau's
Yeah,
movie.
okay. There's a book that is basically how they made that movie. Because that's one of the great, that and Brothers McMullen are like two of the great independent film success stories. Um, and uh and uh and Spike Lee's Girls Gotta Have It, maybe, which one of his earlier ones too, but like uh Favreau's Swingers, they had this whole book about like how they put everything together, their budgets, and this was not when you could shoot things on, you know, there was nothing digital about this, and they still
Yeah.
managed to pull it together. So you could find stuff. I've always loved film. So and I think there is something about I've always felt that having a having my roots in journalism, that kind of day in and day out having to shape stories, it is really great training. um Especially it's also good for like giving yourself deadlines and getting things done and learning to like detach a little bit from outcomes and not fiddle constantly because you can't. You're not allowed to. You have to turn things in.
Yeah.
um, so just the idea of wanting to tell bigger stories and different stories and, make up stuff. I read a lot of fantasy. The movies I like tend to be very kind of, all over the place. A lot of them very kind of epic and large and fanciful. So yeah, it was just something I was always drawn to, and I was writing anyway, and I was like, well, I might as well try that.
What are some of your all-time favorite films?
Oh my God. Um, that's constantly changing.
Yeah,
Like,
but there's got to be some that
yeah,
are
I'm thinking,
just
I'm thinking,
constant.
I'm thinking, I'm
Yeah.
thinking. It's funny, somebody asked me one of my favorite books the other night at an event. I was like, "Oh my God." Um,
Well, what'd you say for that?
I said a bunch of things, and then they said a book that kind of defines who you are, and which I'd never been asked before, actually. And I was trying to think, and I was thinking, and I forget what I said at first. And then I went, oh my God, from the mixed up files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler. And I realized that book actually was kind of an encapsulation of me, a kid who wanted to like go hide in a museum and pretend they lived in another time, and a woman who, with this, massive file cabinet. So if there were a lot of things about that book that that spoke to me. We I mean, I in my newsletter a month or so ago, I wrote about the movie Vincent and Theo. I had been thinking about the movie Vincent and Theo with Tim Roth playing Vincent Van Gogh. There were a lot of really great art house films that were coming out in the late 80s, early 90s. Elizabeth. I loved the movie Elizabeth with Kate Blanchett. I thought I thought that was a spectacular film. I can recite all the Star Wars movies, but who can't?
What's your favorite
Uh,
Star Wars movie?
Empire Strikes Back.
Do you, what are your thoughts on the more recent trilogy? Let me ask you this.
It's okay.
Is The Last Jedi like Last Jedi? I think gets a lot of hate, but personally, I like it.
Wait, are you talking about you're talking about the first, you're talking about four, five, six?
I'm talking about
A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back.
no, I'm talking
Oh,
about the
Last
one
Jedi,
that
not Return of the Jedi. You're talking about Last Jedi with
the
Rey.
one that Ryan Johnson
Yeah.
directed. The middle
Which,
one between the two J.J. Abrams ones.
yeah. They're fine. I think it's I don't know that they're fine. I enjoyed seeing
Yeah.
them.
What about Rogue One and Andor? Did you watch all those?
I did watch Rogue One. I did watch Andor. I did watch Solo. I watched
Well, that's where the list stops, quite
yeah.
honestly. Even
Well, I
Solo,
watched
Solo was
I
fun,
haven't
but
seen Mandalorian I haven't seen that movie. I did watch a couple seasons of that. I mean, I enjoy it because I enjoy those worlds, but I mean, for me, it's like the first three that came into theaters. I'm not going to say the first three that were ever,
yeah.
in the chronology. The first three that were ever in theaters are the ones that kind of hold a special place in my heart.
Okay. Well,
Oh
out
my
of the
God,
original
The
trilogy,
Shining is still Apocalypse Now. See, they're all coming to me now.
yeah.
Apocalypse Now, I can almost recite that movie start to finish. I used to listen to it sometimes if I couldn't sleep because I find Martin Sheen's voice very soothing.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. So, all right. Well, let's get back on track. So, when did you start? Just when, like, what was your very first then nonfiction book? The one that you had the successful proposal. The very first thing that you would find on your Wikipedia. Which, by the way, do you have a Wikipedia? I didn't even look.
Somebody put one up. I didn't have anything to do with it. I only know that it's there because somebody used, despite the fact that when I do events, they are told to use the bio that is on my website. Somebody said, "Well, I got this off your Wikipedia page." I was like, I didn't put that up. I don't know what that is. And they had like the wrong school I went to. So go to my website has plenty of information. Uh,
Interesting. Well, can't
but
you? Is it possible to have that updated on Wikipedia?
I asked somebody this, and somebody said you're not allowed to do it yourself. You have to be a Wikipedia editor. And I was like, okay, I'll get my nephew to become a Wikipedia editor or something and get him to do
So,
it.
yeah, when people have
That's so
Wikipedias,
low on the yeah, it's so low on the
when
list.
people have Wikipedias, I always like to go do kind of like a Rich Eisen celebrity true or false. So you're saying that it says here that you graduated from North Carolina School of the Arts. That is incorrect.
No, that is correct. That's for high school
Oh.
though. That's for high school.
Oh, she earned a BA degree from New York University in 1991
True.
and an MA from Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development of New York University.
Okay, it was not called that when I graduated, so that's actually incorrect.
Is it called that now, though?
It's called that now, but that's incorrect.
Oh, I wonder.
Wait,
Okay, so it's one of that weird things. All right. All right. And you served as a head writer for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire during its first season?
the head writer. Yes.
How, let's talk a little bit about that. How did that come about?
My agent at the time, I was working as a writer producer at for Imus. Imus had an MSNBC. It was a multicast. It was one of the first multicasts ever done where it was um radio, television, and the interwebs at the same time. It was kind of very unique at the time. So I was a producer on that, and my agent called and he said there's some game people are going to do a game show, and and that didn't exist at this point. Like this, none of these shows existed, these competition shows. Millionaire was the first. Millionaire was the one that showed everybody. And then right after Millionaire, a little while after Millionaire was Survivor. And then everything went. But Millionaire proved to people that people will tune in during prime time to watch people compete for things. So he said it's some sort, he said you have a journalism background and you're good with, you're good with trivia and stuff. Do you want to try? And I'm like, what is this? And he said, well, it's going to be on it's going to be on one of the major networks. Do you want me to put you up for it? And I was like, yeah, sure. And I had to do all these I had to actually do it was almost I don't want to say test, but it was kind of like a test. And then went through a whole series of interviews. And then the executive producer, who was also responsible for bringing Millionaire over from, because it started in England, Michael Davies was my final interview. And that interview went exceedingly well because Michael and I are both huge soccer fans. So it was about the job for a while, and then we just started talking about soccer. But yeah, and then I was head writer of the number one primetime. It won a primetime. It won not a primetime Emmy. It won a daytime Emmy. It was the number one primetime show in America at the time.
So are you hanging out with Regis Philbin?
Yeah, I briefed him every night before
Um,
before we taped.
who
So I,
now you said it came over from the UK. Was their whole thing the same setup of like phone a friend and the ask the
I don't
audience, or
remember.
was that some of that you guys added on from?
I don't remember. I know it was very similar, but there might have been some differences. But what the show is now is not what it originally was here anyway. Because
Yeah.
somebody told me something they did on, because it's syndicated now, and somebody mentioned some aspect of the show now, and I said, "What is that?" And it did not exist when we were doing it in, 2000 or whatever year it was.
So how long were you there?
How long was I there? 6. It was supposed to be a 5-week gig. And I was there maybe 6 months, 8 months, 1 year, 6 months, 8 months, not maybe less than a year. I don't know.
Okay.
That was 26 years ago.
And did you had no interest in continuing in the glamorous world of TV game shows?
Well, I was working 7 days a week, about 15, 16 hours a day. So that was getting to be a bit much. And I didn't have much time to write,
Do you
that kind
remember
of thing.
at what point that it really started hitting that like the show was going to be huge? What like was it right out of the
Pretty
gate
much
on the
the
first
first.
episode?
It was the first full week. It was crazy. That's when it went from like, yeah, we're probably not just going to be here for 5 weeks. And we're probably not going to be on once or twice a week. We might be on every night. Um, yeah, it exploded pretty quickly. It
Wow.
exploded pretty quickly. Yeah.
So when did you start doing like the like some because you've done ghostwriting and I'm not going to ask you who you've ghostwritten for, but I mean you have ghostwritten books. And can you talk a little bit about that process for those projects as a ghostwriter where your name's not really attached anywhere, maybe on the cover, like are you doing most and if all the heavy lifting? And I'm assuming maybe that maybe changes project to project.
It changes project to project. And ghostwriting can refer to what some people call co-writing. It can be you're basically writing the entire thing and getting whoever the author is to review what you're doing. It could be a lot of back and forth. It could be your name is on the cover as a with. It could be you're thanked in the acknowledgments. It could be you are not mentioned anywhere because they just, don't want you to be, which is fine. So yeah, it really does vary. It really does vary project to project.
So, how many do you know, like at this point, how many projects you've done specifically just like ghostwriting? And I'm not really talking about like the ones you've co-written with your husband Joe or anything else. Just, I mean, at this
Oh
point,
yeah,
like how
those
many
are
books have you been associated with, even in like a little,
oh my God.
or has it got to the point where you kind of lost track? You're like, I don't even remember.
Well, I did, yeah, it's close to that because I wrote short educational books for Scholastic. I wrote some children's joke books. I've co-written one, two, three, four, five, six books with my husband. Um, and then the big narrative nonfiction books. One, two, three. This is the fourth of those, and then a young reader's version, and then a picture book. I mean, so we're getting close to, we're getting up to, I think I counted once. I don't know. If you count all the kids' books and things that I did, it's educational books. It's probably, I don't know, 18 maybe, I think, 20 something up there.
So you and your husband Joe did the Indiana Jones handbook.
Yes.
What
I'm pretty proud. Yeah.
like what type of I don't want to say that well, I mean, yeah, I guess research. I mean like what type of
Oh, we did a
work goes
lot. We
into
did
like
a ton of
those
research.
to like yeah, to like go into like a book like that, where you're basically taking a very, very popular IP and then kind of, turning it into and Cork Books had published that. Like what type of I mean, yeah, I mean, yeah, just can you talk a little bit? I mean, do you remember anything about that experience?
Oh, that was a ball. We still get people contacting us about that every once in a while. That was done. Now, those books, of course, have to be done in association with the IP holder. So we had to sign an NDA. At the time, it was coming out around the time that the Crystal Skull was coming out.
Hmm.
And so we
I don't
had
acknowledge that movie, but continue.
that's I have nothing to say. Um, not my favorite. And so we had information about because the whole book was basically how do you do what Indiana Jones does, so how do you run across the top of a train, how do you all this sort of stuff, how do you wrangle snake, all this. And so we had information about what was in the movie before the movie came out, so we had to sign a very so that we could incorporate how to blank in the book. So we had to sign a pretty serious NDA, or else
So
people
you
would come to
guys
our
were
house to
aware
get
of the
messages.
dumb ending before everyone else was
We weren't
aware?
aware of that, but we were aware of the nuclear
Right, okay.
blast at the beginning. So yeah, yeah, that was
Um,
I don't, but I'm a fan of those. I'm a fan of those movies. So not all, I mean,
yeah,
not all of them, but so that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun.
yeah. All right, so let's get into well, you mentioned so okay, so for me, for whatever reason, I see the girls of Atomic City, the untold story of the woman who helped win World War II. That was kind of your very first big one, but did you say there was one before? Because currently this you have is you says your fourth book. So like was there one prior to Girls of Atomic City?
No, Girls of Atomic City, as far as
Right.
like big big major release narrative nonfiction. Girls of Atomic City, Last Castle, We Gather Together, Obstinate Daughters.
Okay, we gather together. For some reason, I was thinking, okay. All right,
COVID.
well, let's talk about, okay, so Girls of
COVID.
Atomic City.
Yeah. Yeah.
That one I remember obviously was huge because I remember you were on the Daily Sh Well, and this was fun at the time because for a while then, Jon Stewart was no longer on the Daily Show. Now he's back, but you were a guest on the Daily Show with Jon Stewart. You were all over the place. Huge, huge, huge marketing push. At least that's what it felt like on the outside. I mean, New York Times bestseller. The book was everywhere. How did you decide at that point to just kind of, before you had been doing ghostwriting stuff, you had been doing stuff with your husband Joe, but this was your first, quote unquote solo like big book, and it took a lot of work. I mean, at what point did you decide, okay, this is going to be my next project?
Well, that's very hard to say. So, as I knew I wanted to do a longer term, because some of it was very, some of it was just practicality. So I knew the bigger the project I did, um, the more I wanted to do something that had the potential for like an advance so that I didn't have to write 79 things at the same time. I had also been, oh, I forgot this book. We worked on a book for the Smithsonian Museums. That was about chemistry and, but kind of like how the average American interacts with various advances in chemistry that you might not think about, like, liquid smoke and nuclear medicine and things like that. And we had done that for a lot of these like Indiana Jones, this book for the Smithsonian. We did a book about the television show 24. These are what you would call work for hire. So you get contracted by whatever, in that case it was the publishing arm of the Smithsonian Museums to do a particular project for them. You get paid to do it, but then that's it. You don't get royalties, you don't have the copyright or anything like that. So I was working on that, and it was really interesting. And I came across this photo that turned out to be a photograph of essentially teenage girls enriching uranium for the world's first atomic bomb. And I became just obsessed with the idea of telling the story of the Manhattan Project through the experiences of those young women, because, you pretty much just hear the story of the Manhattan Project through the experiences of a bunch of very genius level scientists in the desert in New Mexico, which is very cool and very fascinating. But I wondered what the Manhattan Project was like for these young women who were working on the bomb without their knowledge. So while I'm, doing all these other kind of projects to keep the lights on, I start trying to track down women who had worked on the project. And I tracked down a bunch of them and did a bunch of research. And this is where it gets, this is a writer's where it gets interesting. The first thing I wanted to do was a screenplay. So I did a screenplay. My manager really liked it, but it didn't get sold. And coming back to like what we were saying before, I was like, well, I've got this whole story here. I'm going to do it and I had done a ton of research before I had done this. Um, I'll do it as a novel. So I wrote it up as a novel. And that my agent took that out, my literary agent, and that got a very interesting response. People loved it, but the response was, I'd really like to see her do this not as a novel, but as a nonfiction book,
Hmm.
because the research in here is incredible and this story hasn't been told, which she considered doing that. So I was like, okay, I did the screenplay, I did a novel. Now I'm going to take that and I'm going to turn it into a nonfiction book proposal. And that's what I did. So that's how that. And what's interesting is a lot of the stuff that I included in the novel, the, made up version of the story, the historical fiction version as it would be. Um, a lot of that stuff was very helpful when I ended up doing the actual nonfiction, narrative nonfiction book, because, I've always liked research and finding out the real deal about things. So
Yeah.
it took I threw a lot of spaghetti at the wall with that one.
So the nonfiction, I mean, the book that was published, I don't want to call them characters, but I mean
Yeah,
the
you can call them
individuals
characters.
in the story that you
Yeah.
tell are obviously based on real people. When you were
No,
doing the screen,
they are real people. They're not based on real people. They are real
well,
people.
they are the real,
Yeah.
right? Okay,
Yeah.
so but when you were doing the novel,
Yeah.
were you kind of like fictionalizing these people, or were you actually trying to like use their? Because I know
I had not
that's a whole
interviewed
thing.
I had not interviewed those people yet.
Yeah. Okay.
I'd done research in the city. I had met a couple people who were still around, who had lived and worked there, but nobody in the novel was based on anyone, because I hadn't started doing that level of interview yet.
Okay. And then we are chugging along. So let's touch base. And then obviously, The Girls of Atomic City, New York Times bestseller. It was, again, it's a very huge book for you. The next book you wrote was The Last Castle. At that point, I mean, doing nonfiction, do you feel so like as a fiction author, oftentimes when you write a certain book, they want you to write, the same type of genre, the same type of book or whatever else. When it comes to nonfiction, do you feel that publishers oftentimes say like, "Oh, this was successful, just do the same thing again but different"? Like, or like, how do they approach that? And how did you decide, The Last Castle? And of course, we're going to work our way up here to The Obstinate Daughters, but like, when it comes to working on a project that that you're going to be spending years and years of time. I mean, there are times where I'll call and talk to Joe, and I'll be like, well, where's Denise? And he's like, she's doing, she's in another state doing research. Like, I mean, it takes a lot of your life just to do research on these projects.
It really does.
So, like, how do you decide what that next project is going to be that is going to spend years and years of your life just doing research, not alone, necessarily even writing it?
I keep I get ideas about stuff all the time, and I just keep massive files of ideas. Somebody sent somebody wrote me after a podcast interview I did for Obstinate Daughters the other day, and wrote me this very nice note. And they appreciated a particular thing that I said during the interview. And I was like, oh, thank you, thank you. And I was like, you know, that could be a book. So I go and I write down, this. So I get ideas all the time, and sometimes I go back and revisit them, and I think they're horrible. And there's some ideas that kind of don't sort of let you go. And yeah, I mean, after Girls of Atomic City, people were like, oh, and you get it from readers as well as, do you think you want to do another book on women in war? It's like, no, no, I really don't. With Last Castle, which is about Biltmore House, which is the largest house in the nation ever, still is. I had, you know, I had never thought about writing about it because it's in the town I live in, but I always had friends come visit, but it's a fascinating place. But I was always interested in the stuff that wasn't necessarily, I was interested in the forestry aspect. I was interested in Edith Vanderbilt, not, George. And, finally one summer I had two friends visiting who did not know each other, who came at two completely different times. One was a professor, one was just a theater director who was an avid reader, and they both said the same thing. They were like, why don't I know more about this place? This place is really fascinating. And I thought that's interesting that, when you live in a place where something's a big deal, you think everybody knows about it. Like everybody in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, before the book came out said, why are you writing a book about this? Everybody knows about this. And I said, I really don't think everybody knows about this. And then Girls of Atomic City came out, and they couldn't believe how popular it was. So then this documentary came out called Queen of Versailles, which was about a family in Florida that was going to build the largest house in America. And they let a documentary crew follow them around. This then became a Broadway show. It was a horrific, it goes completely off the rails. And they kept talking about they were going to build the largest house in America, and it was going to be 90,000 square feet, which is very big, but that's half the size of Biltmore House. And for some reason, that just made me think, I want to talk about like the end of the Gilded Age, and I want to examine it through Biltmore House, but I want to focus on Edith, and I want to focus on the community and the forestry. So it just kind of, that's how that idea finally came to pass. So
Um, and then after that, you did We Gather Together. Can you talk a
yeah.
little bit about then transitioning from The Last Castle to We Gather Together, and then how that transitions then to Obstinate Daughters?
Yeah, I had actually thought that Obstinate Daughters would be before We Gathered Together. So We Gathered Together. I love Thanksgiving, and I've always been kind of annoyed at the fact that we continue to perpetuate the myth of Thanksgiving that a lot of us were taught in school, when the true story is so much more interesting. And that's one of the things I like about true stories, is often there's so much more interesting than the stuff that we make up. So, the reason we have the national holiday of Thanksgiving is because of a widowed mother of five who, with no formal education, who became a really powerful magazine editor in the mid 19th century. And she was obsessed with having Thanksgiving on the same day every year throughout the country, which was not the case for many years. And she petitioned all these presidents, and the president who finally kind of agreed with her, I'm summing this up there's a lot of ins and outs, was President Lincoln in the middle of the Civil War. And I thought how interesting that, Thanksgiving came to be, really got its start, the Thanksgiving we know today, end of November, in the middle of the Civil War, when it wasn't about coming together at all. But I thought I was going to do Obstinate Daughters first. But then this is just, publishing stuff. When it was brought to the publishers, they wanted to do a two-book deal, but they wanted We Gather Together to be first. So that's why We Gather Together was first. So I did We Gather Together first, but I had already started working on Obstinate Daughters because it's a bigger book than We Gather Together. So
Well, yeah,
those,
can we go
yeah,
back a little bit then? Talk a little bit about, well, just like what's the elevator? I don't want to say elevator pitch because obviously it's much bigger than that, but like, what is Obstinate Daughters about? And then can you talk about like, when did you start having that inkling of the idea? Like, was this back
yeah.
during like Girls of the Atomic City, Last Castle? I mean, when did you realize, okay, this is something I really, really want to do?
The Even before then, actually. So Obstinate Daughters is the story of the American Revolution. All the stories we've heard, like, Valley Forge and, Boston Tea Party and Lexington and Concord and Saratoga and all of those things, except told through the experiences of women, enslaved people, and indigenous peoples. So it is a narrative of, start a little bit before the war began and take the reader all the way through the Treaty of Paris and the end of the war. But so it's, chronological, the story, a narrative, the story of the war. But the voices, the characters who are escorting you through that story are people like are women or diarists or women who fought as soldiers or women who were enslaved and, were fighting for their freedom. Um, Cherokee leaders. So that's what it is. So it's in the way that The Girls of Atomic City is the story of the Manhattan Project, but told from a different perspective. This is the story of the American Revolution, but told from a different perspective. And there's also a travelogue thread in there where I occasionally go to some of the places mentioned in the book in the 21st century and examine what the legacy is or is not of some of the people who were mentioned, featured in the book. So when Joe and I were working on books about the signers of the Declaration of Independence and the signers of the Constitution back in 2006 or 7 or 8 or 9 or something, but definitely way before 2010. And in the course of doing some of that research in Charleston, I came across the story of Eliza Pinckney, who was this just genius, self-taught botanist who's considered responsible for the resurgence of the indigo economy in the colonies. Indigo is a plant that gives us that amazing blue that at the time was the blue on the the eventual American flag, and used in clothing and used in all sorts of ways. And she was just this incredible, teenage entrepreneur and amazing woman, and became a huge part of the colony of Charleston's business, sort of business world at the time. But I don't write biographies. Like, I don't want to write a book about one person. So she goes in the idea file. And over the years, I just kept thinking about, who were some other women from that era? Was there a way I could tell this? Was there a way I could tell this story? And so gradually, I started to notice, like, I might have enough women here that I could actually create a narrative of the American Revolution that's told from this point of view. And then started working in earnest on it in like deciding this is the one I want to pitch next, because I do pretty intense proposals because I need to know that there's a there because I write nonfiction. I can't make stuff up. That was 20 right when Last Castle came out, so 2017, 2018. So I'd been kind of gathering things, but it was like, agent, this is what I want to do next. That all started around 2017, 2018. And then I started really digging into everything. But then We Gather Together came first because that's what they wanted.
So when you are like, how do you structure when it comes to like a nonfiction book? I mean, do you just try to look at things linearly in terms of time, or I mean, or I guess maybe that changes like project to project. Like, how did you specifically? I guess what makes this book different, maybe structurally, or than like the past nonfiction books you've done, or maybe it's similar.
It's similar. I use Scrivener. If you want to talk like software, I love Scrivener. When it comes to structure, I think Scrivener is amazing. Um, my structure will often change. I like working from an outline. I am also a fan of throwing the outline right out the window if you have to. I kind of think of outlines as kind of like GPS. I know I want to start here. I think I want to start here, and I know I want to end up here. So I'm going to figure out a route of how to get there. But along the way, I may very well, take a detour. So that it's the writer GPS of like rerouting, because you took an exit you weren't going to take. Um, so I like to start with a pretty detailed outline, whether or not I actually stick to it. And I find Scrivener very helpful for that. And for these books, they're fairly, I will sometimes start a little bit into a story and then go back to the beginning and come forward. Because sometimes I like to just give the reader a taste of where we're going to go and then come back. So I would say mostly chronological, because I mean, even when I'm reading thrillers, I mean, unless I'm reading something that's um really really kind of stretching the, like, Visit from the Goon Squad or something like that, which I loved. I do like books that kind of, operate start to finish. Lord of the Rings is basically, it's a journey, right? I want to go on a journey with Sam and Frodo. And
Yeah.
similar to that, I have to build out my world. Tolkien devises a whole language and you got to buy into Middle Earth if you're going to run around with Sam and Frodo. And so I have to find ways to help people buy into what it felt like in the 18th century, and I do that through maps and newspapers and recipe books and broadsides and cartoons and all of that sort of stuff. So, but I would say I usually like a story told, yeah, kind of start to finish, kind of, not always, a little bit.
So with the last four books, including this most recent one, which now obviously, writing a book is not easy. But was there any of these books that kind of maybe came more naturally, or like which book maybe like was the hardest to write, and maybe in terms of just like research? I mean, I'm sure like the level of research maybe is different with every book, where you might spend more. I don't know. I mean, like just when it comes to nonfiction, I mean, which one kind of came together a little bit easier than the others, maybe? And then which one was maybe the hardest?
Well, certainly. So, Girls of Atomic City, I had actual people I could talk to. So, that was something I had in that book that I didn't have for any of the others. So, I could talk to people about what they did at certain, during certain years at certain parts of their life. And so that was something that I had for that I did not have for the other books. And those interviews So their voices were really easier to get in a sense because of that. The further back in history you go, uh, the more challenging it is, because it's very dependent upon what kind of archival resources you can find. So in that respect, I would say the scale and because of the scale and the time period, Obstinate Daughters was definitely it was a big one. It took a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, um, and then in terms of audiobooks, Girls of Atomic City was narrated by Cassandra Campbell, who, she's done Where the Crawdads Sing. She did my very first
Oh, is
Andrew
that
Bishop Girl
true?
Gone Mad. What's that?
Really? Is that true?
Yeah, I'm not
Oh,
making
okay.
that up.
Yeah, I didn't know. I
I wouldn't
didn't
lie
know
about
that.
that. Well, the only reason I know that is because when we sold Girl Gone Mad and they asked about narrators, I had just recently listened to Where the Crawdads Sing, and I was like, I like this Cassandra Campbell. Can we try to get her? And they managed to do that. So that was narrated
That's
by Cassandra
hilarious.
Campbell.
Delia lives here. Delia Owens. She lives here.
But
Yeah.
you did the most recent books. You did The Last
I did.
Castle. You did so. Like at that point, was that something where you pushed for it? Did the publisher say, "Hey, would you like to do this?"
Yeah.
And then can you just talk about like, I mean, like I'm assuming that you're in the booth. You're not like I talk to some narrators sometimes. They have their own home booths, especially after COVID. But I mean, I'm assuming you don't have a home booth. Like you probably had to go to a somewhere, and then you're in like a booth there, like just reading aloud the book that you wrote.
Yes. So, the pub it, when Last Castle, when it was time to do Last Castle, they said, do you want to do it? People like it when the author reads the book. Okay. So for Last Castle, Brilliance was the production company, and they also did like actual CDs that you like would rent in libraries as well as, streaming, that sort of thing. And that was a studio in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan. And that was like big building, and Brilliance has stuff going on all the time. And you have a director and you have a sound engineer. That's basically it. And you're in a booth, and the director is right outside the booth. And that was very similar to my most recent audio production, audiobook production for Obstinate Daughters. In that case, for Obstinate Daughters, I was in the Penguin Random House studios, which are in the Penguin Random House building in New York City. But same thing, I had a producer, and she sat right outside the booth and I was in the booth. For We Gather Together, I did We Gather Together for adults. I read the Young Readers edition, and I read Giving Thanks, the picture book. Those were done, those were COVID books. So those were done in a little constructed, a sound guy came, constructed like we had some C stands and blankets, and there was a small studio set up in my living room. He was in another room because we had to be distanced. And then we had a director and a producer via ISDN, and they were out in LA. So the we gathered together, the COVID recordings were that was very different. And that was all in this house, and you're waiting for like, leaf blowers to go away, and somebody's dog barks and all that sort of stuff. But the other for Last Castle and Obstinate Daughters, it was, yeah, you sit in a booth, and for Obstinate, you're reading 6 hours a day usually, and it can be very tiring. And also, of course, as a writer, I mean, anytime you're reading your work, you're like, I would change that. I
Well, yeah,
wish I had
that's what I
done
wanted to
that.
ask you. How
I wish
tough it
I
is.
Oh, I forgot that. I wish I had added that. It's just like, ugh.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's why I want to ask how difficult. I mean, like, okay, so like Obstinate Daughters, it's about what Audible says here is about 13 and a half hours long.
Oh
So
wow, okay.
like what we call a per finished hour, usually like a narrator, they have that like finished hour, and then like how long, I mean, for a book that was 13 and a half hours, like how long were you in the booth? I mean, how much
Oh,
voice did you have to give to that?
it was a 5 days recording. 5 days recording. Yes. 5 days. Yeah. 5 days recording. And I was there basically between 6 and 8 hours a day. And we took an hour for lunch.
And then did you have to do pickups like a week or two later, like when they went back through and realized, or were they kind of producing it as you were going so that
You
you wouldn't
kind
have to
of
go back
produce
later?
it, you kind of produce it as you, they kind of produce it as you go. And you'd also do you do several, sometimes if something was tricky, I mean, the woman's there listening to me, she's there the whole time. So, say that again, try that again. You took too deep of an inhale, then try that again. So the idea is because the producer's right there listening to absolutely everything, you're reducing the number of pickups that you have to do. And because you can sometimes do like multiple takes of words or names that are difficult to pronounce, then once it's in post, I mean, they can kind of stitch things together pretty well. So like they had wanted me to do just a few pickups, and I was like, well, do you want me to, me to fly back up there? And then she talked to whoever the editor was, and they were like, no, they were just able to put it together from, it was one of those things where I'd done several different takes of, I think it was somebody's name or something. So yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, didn't
Um,
do pickups.
but yeah, I can imagine that's difficult then coming, a writer to, because like you essentially have to read what's written on the book. I mean,
Oh
I,
yeah.
I think the only audiobook I've ever listened to that goes off script was Leslie Jones when she's reading her book and decides to just like tell stories and like she does an extra like hours and hours and hours of what's not actually in the book. But
That's
reading
cool.
nonfiction,
I
whatever's
mean,
there. So are you
There
somebody
were there
like,
were times where you had to keep like there was something I noticed that because stuff gets through everybody. It was like, yeah, that sentence should actually that word should be this, not that. And then that's made and that's a note that goes to the editor so that the next printing includes that change. So there are a couple instances where the audiobook reveals changes that actually need to be made to the copy.
okay, so it's actually a
Yeah.
benefit then reading your own audiobook so that you catch things that maybe having gone through the copy edit phase and proofreading and everything
Oh
gets
yeah, it's
missed.
gone through everything at that point. But I mean, it has to be something that has to change, like because it's causing a clarity problem. You can't just, gee, I wish I wrote that differently. And that's I mean, that comes up constantly, but that's the way it goes.
So when it comes to titles, do you like, are these the last couple of books, are those your titles? Are those the publishers? Have you guys collaborated on what you feel would be best? And the same thing with the subtitles, because I guess like every single nonfiction book has some type of subtitle. I mean, when you're working on a project, is that something in the back of your head you're thinking of like what you want to call it, what the subtitle will be, or is that something you just don't really kind of worry about until the end?
No, I do think about it. And it depends. Subtitles often get parsed a lot because everybody's concerned about SEO and how things are going to turn up in internet searches and all that sort of stuff. Um, the titles are the titles. Girls of Atomic City changed a couple times. The subtitles on all the books changed a lot. That usually becomes like this constant round robin of, well, we should say this, and this because you want to make sure people understand what it is. And you want to make sure if people are doing a certain search for a certain kind of thing on the internet that, they somehow come to your book. So the subtitles are always kind of all over the place. But um, Last Castle and Obstinate Daughters were basically the titles I wanted for those. Girls of Atomic City had originally been called Calutron Girls because the machines that some of the young women operated were called Calutrons. Um, so then that title went through not as many changes as the subtitle did. So it's that sort of thing. But when it comes down to, and I mean, sales gets involved at that point, like sales gets involved, because mostly on the subtitle.
Yeah. And then, so you are currently, I guess, on tour. The book just recently came out. You mentioned that you had been elsewhere. You're currently home, but you'll be leaving again. And when we were in the green room, and this is really fun, you said that you have like tour t-shirts,
Yes,
which you're wearing right now, and you also have other t-shirts. So you have merch for
I
people
merch.
who want to order some
Who want
merch.
nerdy merch? Yes, I'm wearing my tour t-shirt, but I also got another one so I can show you. So the front is one of the illustration images that inspired the title of the book. Has the title and then the image and tour 2026. But the back is the best part because that's more like I did it like I was in a band, but nerdier. So that has all the dates and bookstores. So the cities and bookstores and the dates that I'm going to be there.
Yeah, so what's coming up? Can you tell us where you
Yes,
some like
according to
as
the
of right
shirt,
now, July
according
3rd, we're
yes,
filming this. Yeah, what do you have
yes.
coming up?
July 4th, the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library in Atlanta, books sold by the Bookworm. July 7th, Raleigh, Quail Ridge Books. July 8th, right outside Chicago, Anderson's Books. July 9th, Page and Palette out in Fairhope, Alabama. July 13th, Rainy Day Books in Kansas City, and on and on and on. So,
Wow.
yeah. And then just,
Um,
made some fun, like, this is one of my favorites, Obstinate
that's
to Pay
good.
Yet. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, that's, you try to have fun with it. But I have
Yeah.
had like some events, people saying, "Oh, I'd love to have that shirt." And the booksellers like it because their bookstores on it.
Well, if anybody wants to order a shirt, where would they do that?
They would go to our Shopify store. My husband Joe and I have a Shopify store, and it is joedenise.com. So
Joe Denise.
JoeDenise.com.
Great. And then if people wanted to like stalk you online, where's the best way to do that?
DeniseKiernan.com. Yeah,
Very
just
good.
DeniseKiernan.com. And the newsletter is newsletter.DeniseKiernan.com. Newsletter is called Denise is Curious, comes out usually a couple times a month. Some writer stuff, but also just mostly like, you know, recipes, what's going on in my garden, random thoughts about sometimes movies, sometimes something I read, sometimes television shows, um, the occasional recipe, always a picture of my dog Bruno.
Always
So
have to have a
that's
picture of the dog.
always
So,
have.
speaking of TV, anything good or movies recently you've watched, listened, seen, read, would recommend
Yeah,
to people?
I watched um I watched a documentary about Jane Goodall who lived with chimpanzees, and it was fascinating. And basically there was all this footage from the late 50s, early 60s that they thought was completely lost that they found. And they put together this documentary interviewing her before she died, which wasn't that long ago, and then combining it with all of this documentary footage of her in the 1960s being basically the first person to gather as much information as she did about chimpanzees and the communities they form. And it was fascinating, fascinating. So I really enjoyed watching that. I started recently, Jeff Tweedy wrote a book, A World Within a Song, and it's a really interesting creative process book. So I really like that. I would recommend that to I would definitely think it's a good book for writers. Jeff Tweedy, World Within a Song. Yeah.
Yeah, good. And then finally, obviously these books take an immense amount of research. Between books, do you take time off, or are you already thinking of like what the next book is going to be?
Oh
Um,
yeah. Yeah, I don't I mean, I'm not doing a lot. I'm doing some thinking and note taking on the road, but it's pretty intense, so I don't have a lot of time to work on the road. But yeah, we're already been talking about the next one for a few months now. So I'm debating between three different things, which means I'm doing a little bit of research into those things to decide which one I kind of want to pull the trigger on. And I'll see what the editor wants and what the agent wants, but ultimately I'm the one who has to spend time with it. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't, there's always overlap, always overlap.
That's very exciting.
Yeah.
Well,
And I
we
am
are.
working with a producer on, we're making good progress on the possibility of, I'm working with a pretty established producer, on the Girls of Atomic City, making it a television series. So
Oh, that would be amazing.
I've been down this road before. We'll see how it goes.
I know. When it comes to film TV, you
We'll see
you
how
can't
it
get
goes.
hopes up at all.
Nope. It's fun. I'm lucky that I'm in the situation I am with that and with this producer, but who knows?
Yeah. And then I know that you have a copy of the book there behind you. You can
Yes.
kind of see it, but can you pull it up a little bit just for anybody who wants to see it? So this is currently in bookstores right now, or the audiobook, which Denise also narrates,
Hmm.
Obstinate Daughters, the Rebels, Riders, and Renegade Women Who Ignited the American Revolution. Of course, just in time for, America's 250.
Yeah.
Um, so Denise, thank you so much for your time. I know you're very busy. You're home, very, you want to spend time with your dog and maybe Joe. I guess Joe's there too.
Maybe. Yeah.
But yeah, no, again, thank you so much. I don't want to keep any more of your time. And so everybody go check out Denise's book. And yeah, we'll see
Thanks for
everybody
having
next
me.
time. Absolutely. See
Yeah.
everybody next time. Bye.